I'm here today with Dr. Bowman, who is taking a trip to Ankara, Turkey to teach through the Fulbright Program in 2017. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin.
First off, what was the process for you getting chosen for this trip?
So Fulbright has a fairly detailed application process. It started when, it's something that's been in my mind for probably close to a decade, and I've taken trips on Fulbright-like projects in the past, but not for many, many years and never as a full-time academic. So this is something that I've always wanted to do, and our development office put together a seminar and brought a Fulbright speaker here last May, and that gave me the energy and the information that I needed to really dig into the process. So last summer, I spent the months of May, June, and July putting together an application, and I chose to do a Fulbright teaching scholarship, which meant that I would need to explain, first off, I would need to get a sponsor. So I had to get a letter of invitation from an academic in Turkey to say, come to our host institution and join our faculty and community and teach these courses. And I had to work with them and explain what I wanted to focus on when I was there, which courses I wanted to teach. I had to create syllabi from those courses, and then I had to write a detailed personal statement about why I wanted the Fulbright. So there was quite a bit of back and forth with colleagues of mine in Turkey to get the letter of invitation, and then there was a lot of research and writing on my own part to figure out what I wanted to focus on.
And now is Fulbright, is that a program that's through the school you're going to in Turkey, or is that something that Fisher sponsors?
Neither, or both. So Fisher's role in this, I'm taking this during my sabbatical. So assuming that I get approval for my sabbatical, this will all go through. That's in the works too. Fulbright is its own program. It was created after the Second World War. It was sponsored by, I believe it was a U.S. senator who, after World War II and in the era of the Cold War, the Fulbright money was set aside, and the program was created to help scholars from around the world spend time in the United States and to help American scholars spend time in other countries.
Okay.
So it's meant to be sort of more grassroots, get to know people on a civic level, especially through universities, and facilitate an exchange of ideas and get people to know our system better and make sure that there are lots of people in our country and universities and colleges who understand what's going on in the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So that money is set aside by the federal government. It's administered by the Department of State, and in each country there is a separate commission. So there's a Fulbright Turkey Commission, and this grant had to first get approved by a committee of people in Washington who review all of the applications and rank them. And after you get through that hurdle, it goes to the Fulbright Commission of each respective country. So the Turkey Fulbright Commission looked at the pile of vetted applications, and then they had to give their approval. And then it goes back again to the State Department, and the State Department gives its final approval.
Oh, wow.
So there's quite a lot of, once you submit your materials online in early August, you start to wait, and then you get news, and then you wait some more, and that was kind of what my process was like. And I should also say that I applied to go to a university in Istanbul called Bosphorus University, but what happened is, apparently they had too many applications for people who wanted to go to that particular university, and I think Turkey Fulbright wanted to spread people around the country more, and they asked me if I'd be willing to go to a different university and get another letter, and so I did that, and that's how I've ended up at the moment appointed to go to Ankara University in Ankara in January 2017.
Okay. Okay, and are there any specific goals you have for yourself while you're in Ankara, or anything that you want to specifically get across while teaching, or anything like that?
Yeah, so it looks like I'll be teaching graduate students, and I'll be teaching 2 courses, and one course will be about civic engagement and service learning and experiential learning. So I'll be working with people who are studying to become teachers, and some of those also may become academics, and encouraging them to think about ways that they could, in their own teaching, they could get their students to do more project-oriented work or perhaps form partnerships with organizations in the community. And this would be in the equivalent of like K through 16, right? So whatever level they end up teaching in, I think you can do this effectively. And it's a meaningful way not just to learn the content that you're designated to teach and to assess, but also to help forge better relationships with the community and to have students even more engaged in what they're learning than they may be otherwise. It's a nice complement to other traditional types of teaching and pedagogy and assessment. So a goal would simply be run effective classes and build good relationships with those students and expose them to a type of teaching that they may not have had as much exposure to in their traditional training in the Turkish national curriculum. So that's one goal. Another goal will be to build relationships with faculty members. We have in the past here at Fisher had some opportunities where faculty from other countries come here and we send faculty there. So getting to know people and strengthening relationships with colleagues of mine at universities in Turkey is the kind of thing that could fit nicely into long-term plans that we have to make our own campus more diverse and more global in the form of future people going to spend time from Fisher into these universities, and maybe even some of these faculty members coming and spending some time with us. So that's another goal. I'm certainly open to the idea of promoting exchange on the student level too. So I'd like to explore whether there might be opportunities to have graduates or even undergraduates come from the populations of Ankara University, and I may still end up at Bosphorus University in Istanbul in the summer.
Okay.
So having some of those students see us as a place to come and spend a semester or two, and as well as, maybe being able to encourage at some point in the future Fisher undergraduates and graduates to get to know Turkey and study in its universities. That's another possibility. And then finally, a last goal will be to get some scholarship done. And I have questions. The main question that I have going into this is civic engagement and service learning has been gaining in popularity here in the United States and around the world over the past couple decades. But I think there's less scholarship out there about how well this type of pedagogy fits into different national political cultures. So I'm curious about whether this even makes sense to do in Turkey.
Right.
And if so, how? And how might you implement it differently and configure it differently according to the type of institution you are and the type of society that you have?
Right, okay. And going a little bit along with that, I noticed in the article the college had published about you being able to have this opportunity, it mentioned that you hadn't been to Turkey in quite a while. How do you think the country has changed politically and culturally since the last time you've been there?
Yeah, well, so the time period that I know best will date me a little bit, but I first went there in 1992. I stayed there for 2 years in Istanbul through 94. I returned in 97 and stayed again to 2001. So that was 6 years that I lived there, mostly in the 90s. And I was back again for 9 weeks on a foreign language scholarship program where I lived in Istanbul in the summer for 9 weeks, and I went to Turkish class every day. So that was 2003. And I was back again for a month in 2005. So by the time I get there, it will have been 12 years since I'd actually been in the country, and since I'd really lived there, quite some time. How has it changed? Unfortunately, right now, Turkey is going through a lot of political and societal upheaval. They have had a government that came into power in 2003, led by what's called AKP, the Justice and Development Party in English. And That party had some stunning political and economic successes in its first decade of rule, up until about 2010-11. And the Arab Spring has been a great challenge for all of the governments and societies of the region, and Turkey in particular, through a combination of political changes wrought by the Arab Spring, especially the Syrian civil war. This has had spillover effect in Turkey. It's probably too much for me to go into all of these details now, but suffice it to say that they are struggling right now with issues like having a free press, having a vibrant civil society that reflects the interests of all of the people, having freedom of expression, full freedom of expression being protected and valued by the government. And then on top of that, they have the Syrian civil war has led to just a horrific human rights catastrophe that spilled over into Turkey. There are 2.5 million Syrian refugees in that society, some in camps, many of them not in camps, just in cities, destitute in a lot of cases. And this has put a lot of pressure on the society. And finally, it's a laundry list of unfortunate things kind of happening within the last couple years. They have restarted the conflict. The conflict between Kurdish insurgents in the east and the government has resumed, and the military has resumed, and that's led to attacks. That's led to very, very violent conflict happening in predominantly Kurdish cities of the east, and the effects of that are spilling over now into the larger cities of Ankara and Istanbul with attacks against civilian targets. So you've got the Syrian civil war, you've got, and connected to that, the rise of ISIS. ISIS is hitting soft targets in Turkey, as they are around the world. There have been at least 2 attacks linked to ISIS that have happened against tourists in Turkey and against political protesters in Turkey that have taken a lot of casualties. So it's a very dark time. Before we started this interview, I pulled out my phone and I checked, and I had a Facebook message from a friend that I was just checking in on, and he said, it's a little bit of panic and chaos right now. People are really, really frightened.
And I know you mentioned before the interview that your family was going with you as well.
Yeah.
And with that aspect in mind, too, obviously, what precautions are you preparing to take, believe you need to take while over there?
Yeah, well, so I should start from the beginning. There's always a possibility that we don't go, or that this gets postponed or deferred. So that's one precaution, is to simply not go. And unfortunately, that's on the table right now. Should we go, as I hope to, some of the things that you can do are be aware of your environment. Typically speaking, large crowds or political protests are less safe than your regular day-to-day life. If you go to the State Department, you read travel advisories, they'll say things like, get registered so that if we have to send out alerts to you electronically about places not to go or activity that could be dangerous to you. They did that before the most recent attack in Ankara. They actually sent out a notice 2 days before.
Oh, wow.
And but on the other hand, there's a certain degree to which if they're targeting foreigners, or if foreigners or if civilian or soft targets are being looked at by people who are doing these kind of things, there's not, you can't insulate yourself. There's not that much that you can do. You can be aware, you can listen to the warnings, you can know when there's intelligence that suggests it's particularly unsafe, but at the same time, you got to go out and shop for groceries, you got to go to work, your kids have to go out and go to school and do things, so there's a degree to which if you do go, you assent to the possibility that, things could be dangerous. On the other hand, I try to be optimistic about these things and hope that that they can get better, and also acknowledge that we can never be entirely safe wherever we are.
Right. And my last question is a bit similar to that, except it's on a more broad scale, because you see the things that happen in Turkey, and then the recent attack in Belgium, and then a few months ago the one in Paris. And there seems to be a lot of debate on whether, especially for Americans, whether it's safe for us to go to abroad. Why do you believe it's important that we try to maintain that global travel as best we can, even with the chaos that continues to be coming up throughout the world?
Yeah, I think that you have to sort of pose the opposite of that. What will the world start to look like if we become more isolated and estranged from each other? What kind of political ideologies will appear most comforting to us? How well will we understand each other if we don't have good transnational relationships? If we don't have travel, if we don't have international conferences in large cities, in countries that are facing these kind of challenges. So I like to think that it's not just a cliche to say if you don't travel at all, or if you completely give in to these kind of pressures, they win, or the people who perpetrate these acts are seeing the results of them. That's true, they are, right? So there's a degree to which when you do assent to that, you become more isolated, and you start to accept that as a new normal. And I think that Europeans really, they're much more in the thick of it. They're much more on top of each other and in closer proximity to each other. People in Turkey, people in France, Belgium, societies like this. What are they going to do? Where are they going to go? They're really living this much more intimately than we are. And I think that there's a degree to which you want to support that and say, we really are in this together. And for that matter, that goes for people in Beirut and other places around the world that are experiencing these kind of attacks. We risk not knowing each other as well. And I think that plays into the hands of people who profit from that type of atomization of social relations or segregation of national relations. I think that that's really dangerous. Then we begin to have less in common with each other, and we begin to think much, much more about our own particular national interests as opposed to larger human interests.
Right. Well, thank you for coming and talking to me about this today.
Thanks for having me.